So, in talking about comfort, so your comfort's important, and as we saw here, like everybody in this room had different comfort zones, and it's really important when you take kids into nature to realize that they all have different comfort zones as well. And what I found in my study is that comfort has a lot to do with connection with nature, which you alluded to earlier. So this diagram is from this book, Adventure Education. So it's based on adventure education, but I think that we can use it for nature purposes. So this book, which I really like. You can tell by all the like multicolor that she does. Anyways, what the book is saying is that when you're in, this is a diagram to show comfort and learning. So in the panic zone, you're stressed out, you're freaking out, and learning is a difficult thing for people, or teaching would be a difficult thing because learning is a difficult thing. And then as you move inward to get to the stretch zone, and the stretch zone is really an ideal place for learning because you're somewhat uncomfortable, but you're not yet in the comfort zone where motivation is sort of decreased because you're so comfortable. You're like, that's fine, I don't need to learn this. So, and what I found is similar to this in terms of connection with nature and comfort. So on my study, kids who are in their panic zone or feeling uncomfortable, discomfort, would basically feel disconnected from nature. In the stretch zone, I found that they were connecting with nature, and I'm going to use an example. So they're learning things in the stretch zone on my canoe trip is, let's say, building a fire. So when you're building a fire, you're going to go through the woods, you're going to meander, crouch, touch, smell, maybe trip a little, but you're going to learn to pick up your feet and know where you're going to find wood. Generally, we find wood that's scattered on the ground, not like cut down or anything. And then they come back, they use trial and error, they're going to build a fire. And building the fire would be a type of learning that's different than the regular environmental education learning. It's actually a skill that makes you more comfortable in nature. It makes you safer and more comfortable. Like the heat, if it's a cold day like today, if you could keep a good fire going, would make the difference of this day if you were outside. So, and that's a different type of learning, like I said, than environmental education, where we tend to like classify things or work more cognitively. And Go says, or Goff, you can tell me how to pronounce it. I think Goff. He talks about how classification and naming things actually separates people. It's disconnecting. And also, a lot of the time, environmental education is depressing. And this type of learning is not depressing. It actually makes nature feel more like your home. And then, as you move inwards to your comfort zone, I think in the comfort zone is where kids would be aware of their connection with nature. So in stretch zone, they're sort of connecting, and then in their comfort zone, which may only last a moment within the stretch zone, they'd be like, wow, I feel so connected with nature. And kids actually said that, and they weren't pulling my leg. I know kids well enough to know that they weren't pulling my leg. So basically what I see as our jobs as educators who bring kids into the nature is to take kids and move them from the panic zone towards the comfort zone and support them, make them feel comfortable throughout. I'm not saying that the panic zone is a bad place to be. I think the panic zone is a very important part of learning, and it's also a very important part of being outside. But the idea is to overcome it by learning what you need to learn in order to feel comfortable and have these opportunities to feel connected with nature. And let's say you find this a very important thing, and like as a teacher, you're like, I would really like my kids to have these opportunities, but you are uncomfortable. If you are uncomfortable, I think that if you are uncomfortable as the sort of responsible person, it's not an ideal situation because kids will feel uncomfortable if they can tell that you're uncomfortable. But there's no problem in getting help, and I know that there's a whole lot of people who are totally accredited to work with kids and take them outside. You can go to the OCA, the Ontario Camping Association, and try to get contacts with them. I think ORCA is Do you guys know what I'm talking about? No? I think it's becoming a Canada-wide control of camping, and like at the moment it's provincial, but it's becoming a Canada-wide controlled entity. So that's changing, but there's plenty of resources for you guys to find people who are more comfortable than yourselves if you think this is important. Or alternatively, like just taking kids, putting them in rubber boots and splashing around in a pond, or taking them like for like water testing or something for science class, and they learn how to walk on uneven ground. Because if you're like outside as an adult slipping and falling everywhere and never having been exposed to it, you're gonna be like, I'm falling everywhere, I don't like this, you know? But if you get kids to like, honestly, I don't know if you like, if I take people in the woods who aren't used to it, they're falling everywhere and they're not having fun. So even just walking in the woods is really, really something important. So, I'm bringing this up, it's from the policy, Acting Today, Shaping Tomorrow, which is out there, Open 2000, and I think you guys have heard of it. So, it says, students will understand our fundamental connections to each other and to the world around us through our relationship to food, water, energy, air, and land, and our interaction with all living things. So, there's a few ways you can go about doing this, understanding connection, and what I've talked about is just one approach to doing this, and it's an approach that I really believe in. So I wanted to throw it out to you guys so you guys can give me your sort of impression of this sort of approach to teaching connections.
But I guess I really like the idea, and the thing, like for instance, you give the example of like making a fire and that sort of stuff, and it's true that it's like it's not things that are mentioned in the curriculum, but it's I guess there are preconditions that make it easier for people to get that connection with nature, which is like much more, well, in my mind, I guess it's much more important than some of the stuff that could be included in the curriculum, like I don't know, isotopes or whatever. Anyway.
What did you say?
We talked a lot in my curriculum design class about the lack of life skills emphasized in the curriculums now, and I think that this makes a very good point towards that. Especially, like you mentioned, like not even being able to walk outside on uneven ground kind of thing. And I had two little guys that I was babysitting last year, and we went splashing in the puddles, and one of them got stuck. And he's standing there going, I can't move my feet. I said, okay, how are we going to fix it? Yeah, and it was just going through it, and it was like, okay, what can we do? Like, I'm right here, you're not, he was 7, so he was fine, he wasn't panicking or anything. But it was like, okay, what do we want to try? And just teaching them that problem solving as well, which is something that comes so easily when you're out experiencing things. My science teacher was talking about his son in grade 5, they were studying birds and science. They have a forest next to their school, and they never went outside. And my teacher was livid. How do you do an entire unit on nature and not go into nature?
Yeah, but talking about life skills, it's life skills, but also when you're building a fire, you are learning about the connections on a scientific level too, right? You have to explain like fire needs oxygen. It's, you know, like you learn about, and I have a poem that I want to share with you guys later that sort of demonstrates that even though you're not explicitly stating these things, it's life skills, but it's also the curriculum. You have to be a little creative and be able to see it, but it's also a lot of the curriculum in there too.
And I think to be able to recognize situations in which the learning can come organically, like and like you were saying, step back and let students or children inquire for themselves and ask questions for themselves and figure out for themselves how to make a fire instead of telling them these are the steps, you know, or whatever. But opportunities for self sort of like independent discovery. That kind of thing.
Sorry, you can tell me that we can discuss this afterwards if you don't want to
No,
address it now.
But I know, like I'm supposed to. I have slides prepared, but you guys, it's supposed to be a lot.
Well, I
of
guess the
discussion.
intention is just to have like more of a conversation, so.
Right, no, I just don't want to
So-
make this
No,
talk about
no.
something that isn't completely related. I know it's about field trips, and I know we're trying to discuss taking the class outside, but hypothetically speaking, I'm not even sure what reason would be reasonable. But if the class cannot go outside, do you have suggestions or ideas for bringing nature into the classroom? And I don't know if that's bringing, physical pieces or videos or imagination. So.
I do have a suggestion. Yeah, I'll do it now. So one of the things I found to be a very sort of framing thing in my research is that, well, I'll ask you guys the question. I'll promise we'll get there.
Oh,
Okay.
no, it's fine.
So, what is nature? Like, we're talking about experiencing nature, but what is nature? Like, throw out some just.
Organic soil.
Plants, animal, soil. Okay.
Anything non-man-made.
Anything not man-made. Okay.
I was going to say, if we're going to use like a really broad definition, I would include humans and what human makes as well.
So the participants of my study, the canoe trip is sort of framed in this idea that you're going out into nature. And you're going into wilderness spaces or spaces where there's few people and less cities, let's say. And the kids saw nature as, there were three parts of it. One was that it didn't have the amenities of civilization or the amenities of the city. So they talk about missing showers or missing the toilet or wanting to sleep in a bed or checking their internet. And then another piece was the isolation from the population of civilization. So being cut off from those people. And then the last part was the natural non-human features, which is what we were talking, like the soil, plants and animals, and non-human made things. So that's sort of associated with the lack of people. So basically, then nature is what civilization isn't, right? They're two different things. It's like nature is what civilization is not. And therefore, like, we're not natural. Our building's not natural, but a beaver dam is, right? Like, but they build their beaver dam, and our buildings aren't natural. And so we have this dichotomous thinking. So I think that one of the things that would be really useful to do in the classroom would be to talk about that understanding and try to get people to understand that we are natural, and that the things that we do are natural too, and try to build in that connection, because the classroom really is a place where you're going to be thinking about things. So I think that's a really important thing to think about, is how we're natural too, and the things that we do is natural, and it relates back to nature. Because the kids come back from the canoe trips, from their wilderness experience, and they don't even relate the actions that they do in this room with whatever they've done before. They would have walked like 100 meters back into the woods to dump their water, but when they're here, like, they'll just toss a candy wrapper on the street because this is not natural, right?
I think another opportunity, like you said, not going outside at all, but I think sometimes we think if we want to go outside, we'd have to go to a reserve, or we'd have to go somewhere that's natural, and we'd have lots of room and space. But I think showing folks that the schoolyard, even though there's basketball nets and maybe only a couple of trees or something, but that is nature too, is sort of bridging that gap as well.
So